Okay, I think we are live. I'm checking things in here to see if it worked. Actually, yeah, it seems to be working. Some of you are connected. Welcome. If you are connected live, if you can hear me properly, you can drop me a comment. That would be a good start. It's always a good start to ensure that all the tech is working properly before we start a monologue. Meanwhile, we'll talk a bit about how this is gonna go. I posted on Facebook, right, a link for this live, inviting people to post questions if they had any about the drills, the mini drills we have seen this week together. And I realized that some of you are still getting around it, wrapping your head around the drills per se, finding some time to execute them, and those drills anyway. Hi, Colette. So I suppose I hope you can hear me. Thanks for being here. Always a pleasure. You have inspired many people with your circular kick-up, so it's really down to you as well. Some of the momentum in the group for sure. Those drills are not meant to be mastered in one day. I'm going to start with this caveat. I've tried to lay down some progressions to get to the straddle up, but in the process, hopefully, guide you towards my philosophy, or expose you to rather my philosophy when it comes to handstands, so that you can take something out of it and apply it to the way you see handstands yourself and you start learning them. And part of what I was trying to convey to you is the idea that just like in any practice, we just don't jump to some of the highest goals we may hold for ourselves without reaching some milestones in the process first. And sometimes those milestones, they're kind of hard to define in handstands. We're not quite sure what is supposed to be easy, what is supposed to be hard. We compare ourselves to our fellow hand balancer and we don't understand why it may come easier to them, or sometimes why we look different than they do and we think that we're doing something wrong, yada, yada, yada. And so hopefully bringing things down to the idea of, am I light or not against the wall? Can my shoulders accommodate the straddle or a piked variation in the first place? Or hopefully all that gives you an idea of how you want to think in terms of mechanics when it comes to your handstands, and something that you may be able to take and to apply to any kind of shape you want to learn, right? This is just a pretense to start thinking maybe differently when it comes to your handstand process. The way I see it, is that you have limited time. And I know that many of you who have been doing the challenge, you're really dedicated, and the progress that you display speaks to that. So well done. But still, when we're not doing this professionally, we usually don't have 2 hours per day to dedicate to it. And so the idea is to be efficient in the way we program for ourselves. Versus just spending time fluffing around, which can be fun, but not leading to much progress. And the problem behind that being handstands, contrary to other practices, when we don't progress, it becomes frustrating quite quickly. And when we get frustrated, then we just want to quit or to bang our head against the wall. Anyway, I'm going to jump into, I don't have that many questions. So what I'm going to do, if you have questions that come to you or that you have been saving on the side, you can type them on the YouTube Live and I will see them. I will start with the question I got on the Facebook group. I will have a look again on Facebook to see if there's anything updated. And then depending on how it goes, I may just have a look. It may be a bit tedious because I will have to scroll and you will have to wait while I find something. But I will have a look at some of the questions which may have been asked. I was not always tagged properly, so sometimes my name is just floating this way, but I don't have the tag per se. But maybe there is a feature now in Facebook that allows me to actually search for my name and see if there was a question. And sometimes you were tagging, but there was no question. So I tried anyway to dive into some of the details which were not clear and answer any questions that you can have subsequent to that. There could be questions about the press or the pikes in general, or your handstand, even if you're not, for instance, if you are not able to reach the wall with your bum because your shoulders are not quite open just yet. Stuff about what you could do to get to that would be, for instance, something we could cover. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a question which may sound a bit daunting for those of you with whom we haven't established a common vocabulary. And so, of course, when you're new to the word of handstand, there's quite a handful of concepts to get familiar with. And then everybody who teaches handstands has their own way of describing things and sometimes their own set of words and concepts around which they articulate the way they teach. And so this question here is loaded with terms that I understand because they come from a method that we have worked with together. I'm going to try to define those terms for you to get something out of it anyway, and I will answer the question in the process. So the question is about compression in pike shapes. And so Colette is saying, when I try to lower my legs in a straddle, a tuck, a half seven, and a seven will be the same, it becomes increasingly difficult to hold the shape. And that you will feel, all of you will feel that, and we're going to explore why. So when you kick up freestanding, or when you reach the wall, butt to the wall, and you try to mimic what a piked shape is, whether it is your tuck, your frog, or your diamond, or your straddle, at some point as you lower your legs, you're going to feel your shoulders giving in. It's the lower your legs go and the harder it is for the shoulders to hold the shape. And the reason for that is an efficient pike has your hips past your head, past your shoulders, overbalanced, overshot. And your legs are usually, one or both legs are usually the other way, undershot. And those two masses being at either side of a vertical axis makes it easy for you to actually balance with minimal effort. And the moment this balance is being shaken because we bring the two masses on one side or the other, our handstand becomes much more complicated. When we lower the legs, when compression gives in, at some point, the pelvis starts moving where the legs are. And then suddenly the shoulders have to compensate for that. The pelvis is not helping you to hold the handstand anymore. It is falling down towards the floor, and so are the legs. And so then it just becomes sheer strength, and that's what, in essence, press to handstand is, right? We are pressing our way into an efficient shape, but in the journey towards that efficient shape, our legs and our pelvis are dragging us down to the floor. And so you're fighting against that. And that's why it is so strength driven. And on that tangent, this is also why very flexible people who can fold and have their hands flat between their feet with their elbows still bent, this is why the press to handstand comes much easier to them, because they're just 1 inch away from having that pelvis already placed in the desirable position. So there is not such a big journey in which they're going to have to muster a lot of strength in their shoulders to bring themselves into the position. And so I hope I understand your question right, but to answer, when you are, let's say, in a straddle or a tuck, right? And the talk, we could actually talk about it, and in the straddle, we could talk about it, but the talk is more obvious. There's such a thing as a straight tuck and a more arched tuck. And then as you allow the shoulders to move away from their axis towards the palm of the hand, we are making our way towards something that's a bit more hollow back. And that allows us to exaggerate the arch in the upper back, in the back in general, and to have our pelvis going further and further in the overshot zone, creating something that is different in terms of mechanics, but cosmetically pleasing, really. So already in that shape that we have defined as being the straddle, we may have a few shades of gray. Like we have to understand that with your given body, not even to mention the fact that your straddle is going to look different from mine, of course, and it's going to look different from your neighbor because we don't have the same limbs lengths, we don't have the same flexibility, we don't have the same bodies at all. So it's meant to be different. And my invitation to you is to try to find the one that suits you first before being too hypnotized by what you see here and there on Instagram. You can hold those shapes as a goal, but if you try to replicate what somebody else does, chances are you will keep banging your head against a wall because you want to find what works for you. If you have shoulders which are not super open, which was one of the videos I've seen, for instance, you can still make it work. If you have a huge amount of compression and you can bring your legs super low, you can have a very different straddle from somebody who is a bit more quote unquote tight and will have their legs much higher up in that straddle. In both cases, we can call that a straddle. And unless you're applying to perform at Cirque du Soleil, it doesn't quite matter, right? And so, Colette, when you lower the legs in your straddle, and everyone, the more you lower the legs and the more those legs are going to be dragging you back down to the floor. At your level, because you can hold, so when we cannot hold a handstand, a straddle handstand yet, what we want to do is to lower them legs just enough. And so compress at the hips just enough while keeping the shoulders exactly where they are, nice and open and over the center of the hand, until we find some form of lightness against the wall and we start being able to use our fingers to balance. And if this doesn't make sense yet, you really have to keep working with the wall. And dare I say, you really have to keep working maybe with easier shapes as well, in which it will be easier for you to feel what the story is when it comes to aligning your pelvis and your legs properly and for your fingers to do their job. Your job in handstands is to hold a functional shape with your fingers as much as possible until you can't anymore, in which case things are going to start moving and you want to know what to do and when to do to bring those things back into something efficient for your fingers to start working again. The longer your fingers can make you hold a handstand and the easier it is to hold a handstand for long and consistent holds. The more you're relying on something else like your shoulders and leg movements, and the more wobbly you're going to be upside down and the harder it is going to be either consistent and or hold it for long. Some people will defy that logic, but for most, like 90% of the people I work with, this is what we see. So again, if that's you and you don't have a freestanding, and by freestanding I mean something that you can do maybe 7 times out of 10 at least for 10 seconds, you still need to be refining where your legs, how low they have to be for your pelvis to be light against the wall, and then push on your fingers and be able to create some holes off the wall with that. And you need to stick to that. Now, Colette, in your case, I know that you can kick up in very different ways into that straddle and hold it. So then it becomes, the question is not about holding it anymore. It is about how do we want to refine it and why, and what do we have to develop to hold a straddle which is closer to the goals we hold. If you want something that is more 7-like with your legs really horizontal, you are going to need to refrain from leaning forward with the shoulders. As the legs lower and once compression starts giving in, we sometimes see the shoulders leaning forward in some form of a planchy pattern. And that's absolutely what we want to avoid when it comes to working on those shapes, because the moment your shoulders lean forward, your shoulder angle closes. So another way for me to say that is you do not want to lose that 180-degree angle between your torso and your arms as you lower your legs. And there is huge value in you trying to find out how low you can go before this starts happening. Because the point at which it happens is the point at which you start your press, really. And you can still hold it. Chances are, if you keep lowering your legs past that point, you will see your shoulders collapsing forward, but you will still be able to fight for a bit, for a few seconds, before you actually completely give in and fall back down to the floor. And that's your press in essence. Your press will include that correction at the shoulders. On your way down from the straddle or the tuck to the floor, you will lower your legs and keep your shoulders nice and open. And at some point, you will reach that breaking point, after which your shoulders will start closing, but you will still be able to fight through it with your shoulders. And at some point, you won't be able to fight against it anymore until you develop full pressing strength. And on the way up, it's the opposite. We take off without pushing on our feet, and which means that those first few split seconds, our shoulders are closed, and our mission is to open them all the way up into a very open position through the strength we can muster and the control in our shoulders. So I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly. Let me know in the comment if you meant something else. But compression, there will be value in us working on compression for the sake of that shoulder angle, for the sake of having that breaking point happening later and later, if you will, right? So if we don't have much flexibility, we're gonna have, if we want our legs to be quite low, either to hold a straddle this way or to go into a press, we're gonna have to rely a lot on strength. And on the contrary, if we can keep the pelvis exactly where it is, keep the shoulders exactly where they are, and lower the legs until the feet almost touch the ground, if I have to exaggerate, because we have huge amounts of compression, then we don't have to break the shoulder angle, and then our life's a bit easier. So, and suddenly our press becomes less strength-oriented and more flexibility-oriented. And by the moment at which it becomes strength-oriented, the moment at which you break the shoulder angle, happens much later when your feet are much closer to the floor, which brings me back to the initial point. When we are super flexible, that pressing thing is much easier for that reason. And I know I really went down a rabbit hole for the first question, so I hope I didn't discourage many of you. This was a very technical question. We're going to make things a bit easier we can make things a bit easier and easier to digest, should I say, even more so if those terms, compression and whatnot, don't quite make sense to you. Then you make an interesting point, and I'm going to follow with this. Compressed shapes, you find them more aesthetics, more eye-pleasing. And I think that's something many people can agree on. When you look at a handstand in which there is some degree of flexibility, where the legs, especially when it comes to the pike variations, when the legs are quite low, it may look better for many than something that is a bit more straight. And obviously the eye almost catches that this is more strength-based and less efficient and refined, if you will. At the end of the day, this question is to be, again, I insist, asked when you get to the point where you deserve to ask the question. There are a few shades of straddle in your own straddle, and you want to find the one first that suits you, and then start asking, how do I go from where I am right now towards something that I find more cosmetically pleasing? I agree with you. I also find the compressed shape very aesthetics, and even in the realm of movement and the way we integrate hand balancing within movement, you'll find that quite a lot, right? Those 7 being held with the head in, where the leg, we have the hollow back, we have the legs nice and low, and that looks very good, in fairness, when it comes to floor work, for instance. And so should this be a goal, then it does make sense to work on your compression on the side. And that may be something else I would caveat. But working on compression, which is sometimes something I've seen, which is sometimes something I still see for that matter, but something I definitely have seen a lot in the past. People work on compression without quite knowing why they work on compression. So I see them sitting and doing those horrible drills where we bring the legs up and down. And don't get me wrong, I have the students do them in classes. But sometimes we obsess over drills which don't have a big ROI. It's just a thing in handstands. We're not quite sure which drill anyway works for us. We try everything. And sometimes we spend a lot of time on things that don't quite yield much results. The compression thing is great when we get to a point where we want more compression because we want a straddle which is more horizontal, or we want a press or a negative press which relies more on our mobility than on our strength. But it is not the key which will unlock the straddle that comes before that. You don't need a huge amount of compression to be able to hold a straddle. What you need is a very decent amount of shoulder flexion, though, and hopefully the drills we did when it comes to assessing your shoulder mobility against the wall, hopefully that was enough for you to realize whether or not it's time for you to work on those. And again, back to those drills, and if you didn't have a chance to do them, I will just say that. If you kick up against the wall and you land on the wall, so your hands have to be very close to the wall, and that's something I'm going to have to repeat because many, despite my best attempts at being clear about this in the tutorials, I still have found that many of the videos I've seen, you were too far away from the wall. And if you're too far away from the wall, if you aim at reaching the wall with your butt, what you end up having is a position which is way too advanced for you to hold at the minute / impossible to hold, period. So the way you want to work with your wall is try to have your hands as close as possible, maybe 1 or 2 centimeters away from between the fingers and the wall, and try to land on the wall with your bum first. And if you find it's too close, then you start making your way further away from the wall, but you don't start from far and try to, because you think it's better this way. It isn't, for that matter, necessarily better. And it's the logic that we apply for piked variations, piked shapes, when we practice them against the wall, is not the same logic we would apply for a split leg position or a feet together position, in which case it would make sense sometimes to go a bit further out. Where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought, I think. Yeah, lost it. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to. This is where the part where I scroll on the screen you can't see happens. I will go briefly through what I can find. Again, if you have questions, you can ask them in the chat. Other than that, we'll keep it short, right? I also have a look at a few videos I've seen, yeah. So you see, when you practice and I'm gonna talk about the straddle per se right now before we talk about the straddle up. When you practice your straddle against the wall, your pike variation against the wall, you want to, for what the reasons we just mentioned, you want to be mindful of the position of your shoulders as you kick up into it. Because your shoulders may give in, they may start leaning forward, they may start collapsing forward, and a small amount of that is okay, but a huge amount of that will not be helpful. It will be hard to have your shoulders planching. That's what they're doing. They're leaning forward, they go over the fingertips, and open your shoulders at the same time. That's shoulder flexion, and find the right position that we are after. You want to be very solid in that foundation that the shoulder to hand axis is. You almost want to have this thing completely still and articulate the rest of your body over it, rather than thinking that it can go forward and backwards. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong every time, but it's in most cases something you want to avoid doing because you're not even conscious that you're doing it, and it will set you off balance without the wall behind you to catch you. So when you kick up against the wall and you find that your head is banging against the wall or your shoulders are leaning against the wall, but you are eventually able to land bum on the wall and to take those shoulders off the wall, you're not far out. What you want to be doing is to anchor that position in which the shoulders haven't leant forward and try to access that more and more. And that's a logic you may want to keep in mind. It is hard to kick up in the perfect position. Otherwise, handstands, you would get them in 2 weeks. Your brain can understand something, but your body won't quite always follow. And you're well aware of that if you're watching this live. So a huge part of your work is to show you what you wish you had done and to be conscious of the mistake you've made instead of always hoping for the best. And in the learning science, they call this shaping, right? Shaping is incremental improvements, successive approximations towards the end goal. And you have to accept and even allow the mistakes that will be made as you climb up that ladder towards your goal. And so here we would have defined a goal as being the straddle up, right? The goal before that, the milestone before that, would have been the straddle. And as you kick up into your straddle, you want to start noticing the mistakes that you're making and really understand what defines a mistake and what is not a mistake. Is just a difference between what you're doing and what the teacher is doing. I.e., back to what you were just saying, how low or high your legs are is a difference. As long as you are functional and in a viable shape against the wall, it doesn't matter. Sorry, I lost that train of thought as well. So when it comes to the way you practice with the wall, going in a bit more meta, you want to expose your brain to the position, catching yourself when you do something that is not desirable. If I kick up against the wall and I'm trying to achieve a split leg position, and I land on the wall, and despite my best efforts, I actually land both feet on the wall with my shoulders leaning a bit forward. I have two ways to treat that. I can either come back down and keep at it until it clicks, or I can stay upside down and mindfully bring my body back into the position that I wish I had landed in and see how that position feels like and anchor the feelings associated with this position, trying to understand better and better the differences between the shape or the position in which I landed and the shape or the position in which I wish or I was intending on landing, and then come back down. And you have those two options, and I hope you understand which one I think is more conducive to progress. I feel that one, you're kind of shooting in the dark until you hit the targets, and the other, you miss the target, but you recalibrate. And you shoot and you miss the target, but you're a bit closer and you recalibrate. And very mindfully and consciously doing that, at some point you just end up being much more able to aim with precision. And so this is why I think that you should do that for any shape you want to master, because they will not come naturally and they will not come in 1 week. This is the beauty of handstands. When it comes to going butt to the wall, if you find that your head bangs on the wall, but eventually you are able to bring that head off the wall to keep your butt there and to find lightness against the wall, it means that your body is able to access the desired range of motion for that shape, but somehow doesn't want to access it with the right timing. And so it's a matter of you greasing the groove and showing the patterns that you have to perform so that you're able to land there eventually. However, one footnote, if it so happens, especially in those pike positions, right, that you cannot take your upper back and head off the wall if your butt is on the wall, it may well be that the current range of motion you have doesn't allow for this, in which case there's nothing to show to your brain. You're stuck in an array of positions which are not light against the wall, which are not viable. In which case, either you know what you're doing and you're using this as a stretch, which is great, or you're wasting your time. So my advice for people who have discovered, if they didn't know, that they don't have the required amount of shoulder flexion yet in the context of pike handstand, my advice for you is to start practicing targeted mobility drills. So use your handstand practice as a way to open up your shoulders. Do not allow your shoulders to lean forward, because they will. You will be tempted to collapse forward. You will be tempted to planche the moment you try to stick that butt out in an anterior pelvic tilt. You have to refrain from doing that, and you have to hold the uncomfortable shape that results from it for duration. And that will do wonders to your shoulders and allow them to open quite quickly and allow you to develop the range of motion that you need to then start embark in that journey of being able to tap into that newfound range of motion. Bridge work is also something that really helps. So you will find plenty of drills about that on YouTube for free. Elevated bridge work is really what I would recommend people who have assessed their shoulders as not being open enough to their taste. It really supplements well handstands. All right. Right. Hi, everyone. Now the questions are coming. So when I fully open the shoulders, they move towards the wrists, not over the center of the hands, which we have seen. And if you keep them over the center of the hands, I can fully open. If I do it at the wall and fully open the shoulders with the shoulders over the center of the hands, so you can with the wall. I am really heavy at the wall and I cannot balance. So whenever, and again, I hope you're understanding that I'm using every question and I'm trying to answer many questions. Right? Any question, I'm trying to make a few questions out of that. Trying to put myself in everybody's shoes, or as many shoes as I can, tapping into the experience I have teaching people for 7 years and trying to remember all the students I've seen and the echoes of the question, your question can be creating in that sense, and how it could resonate with people who are facing similar challenges but not identical challenges. So I'm going to start with the following. When you're really heavy against the wall, the first thing you want to fix or you want to check is your distance, hand to the wall distance, because most people don't have the flexibility required to have their hands very far when it comes to practicing a pike shape. And so as I was saying just earlier, 2 centimeters away from the wall, 3 centimeters away from the wall. If you have a lot of lordosis, if you have whatever, you may find that this is you bounce off the wall. So you're not heavy, you're almost so light that you never can stay on the wall. You bounce like that. Or your head kind of bangs on the wall, then you're too close, in which case, centimeter by centimeter, you make your way further away from the wall. First check, and I know it's not your case, but for 80% of the people, it's gonna be a biggie. Do that. Then once you have done that, it's about finding out how low the legs have to be for the pelvis to start shifting, and that drill is so important. So I'm gonna start with this, right? If your hands are close enough to the wall and your butt is on the wall, you will be leaning against it more or less heavily, probably a bit too heavily. And then changing nothing to your body, if you were to lower the legs, even if you don't have a huge amount of compression, very slowly, very mindfully, as much as you can, at some point, your pelvis should take off the wall by itself. And if it doesn't, in 99% of the cases, it is because the former step was not done. It is because you were too close. People with very limited range of motion who can still bring their bum on the wall, right? And who have therefore more trouble at that, they can feel that. Bum is on the wall, my feet are too close to the wall, I'm heavy, I lower the legs, and at some point the pelvis, if this is the wall, at some point the pelvis boop, takes off the wall and you're back down. But the logic here, it has to be very clear that the logic here is what you can experience a bit more simply with a normal split leg position against the wall. So you are boop, kicking up against the wall, this is my wall, and you're too heavy. Only we don't feel weight the same way when it's our pelvis against the wall. So what do? We lower one leg, and before we even think about fingers, right? We lower the legs slowly. This is what you were doing in the rocket, right? Slowly, pop, 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 until this foot at some point boop, takes off on its own. And that's the first thing I have people do the moment they can reach the wall in class. I'm like, right now, I want you to lower this leg. And for 2 weeks to do that, lower your leg and realize that this is kind of a fulcrum. If both legs are here, you're heavy against the wall. If both legs are there, you're off the wall. And there's a point at which your fulcrum goes from here to there. And at some point, I ask them to just stop before they're about to fall, because that is their quote-unquote light position. Again, the sense of lightness is going to be a bit different when you're bum on the wall. You won't feel as light as you would have felt foot on the wall. But certainly, and we will work on it together, right? Certainly, if you do that with your pelvis on the wall, with your hand close to the wall, and if you lower your legs, you should feel that invariably at some point your bum goes, I just lost it. And you go back and you lower and I just lost it. And if this happens, then lightness can be found because your pelvis at some point was so light that it took off the wall, which means that lightness, a light functional shape, is the position you would have had a second before your legs were that low. So low that it took you off balance, if that makes sense. So I would like us to really, again, I will have a look at your specific video because you're a student of mine, but I don't think you can stay really heavy. It's impossible to stay really heavy if nothing else changes but the leg position that lowers. Now, your first question is a bit more tricky. The first question is, I cannot fully open the shoulders without initiating some form of a holdback, without my shoulders moving away from the wall if I kick up against the wall. And I'm going to argue, there could be two possibilities here in general. Either we don't have the range of motion for that, or we can't tap in, or this is not part of our range of usable motion. And I would be of the opinion that you are, it depends on your flexibility, really. I'm sorry to be so nuanced, but those of you who work with me, you already know that handstands are very much so a personal thing and that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, although there are concepts that are overarching. So why am I saying this? Because I know that the person asking this is flexible. And so when we are flexible, if you know that you have a lot of back flexibility and a lot of mobility in your pelvis and good compression and whatnot, there's nothing wrong in allowing some form of shoulder movement. The same way I was just saying a few minutes ago, there's nothing technically wrong with the shoulder slightly planching forward, as long as we feel what this entails. I would always be of the advice I would always advise people to keep the shoulders over the center of their hands, because at some point, once we have the straddle, transitioning from a straight handstand to a straddle becomes a thing. And if your shoulders have been moving forward and backward, that's one more thing that I have to pay attention to and correct for. And there's already quite a lot to do when we go from straight to straddle. provided that you were fully open with your shoulders when you're straight. At the very least, you're gonna have to start entirely tilting your pelvis and lowering the legs and keep just as open despite the legs coming down and the pelvis traveling overshot. And the dance that this involves, the timing at which those different elements have to be synchronized together, that's quite hard to understand for a few weeks or a few months. If on top of that we have to manage a different shoulder position, that becomes almost not overwhelming, but it's more complicated than need be. And so if on the contrary, we won't even think about that, because whatever shape we achieve, we want to achieve, we keep them shoulders exactly over the center of the hands, then that gives us more headspace to perform the rest a bit better. It is different. So for people who can hold a stock or a straddle, what I ask them past, once they have a good consistency rate and past 10 or 15 seconds, is if they're flexible, to start moving out of that alignment into a more hollow back alignment and back into this alignment. So now that we have something very well understood, something very functional, can we mobilize just one thing, the shoulder alignment, to make the shape, back to what we were talking about with Colette, a bit more contortionist oriented and a bit more maybe eye-pleasing. Definitely something to work on once we have the flexibility. Definitely something not to bother with if we don't have our straddle just yet. Okay? To be now zooming into your case specifically. Sorry, I feel I'm lagging a bit. I hope the connection is still good and that you can still hear me. I'd be tempted to try both. Surprise, surprise, my favorite answer, and pick a winner, right? And in your specific case, I would be almost tempted, which is quite rare, to put some chips behind a fully open, but with the shoulders moving backwards, straddle. Which for most people, I would not say that for the reasons we just elaborated on. But again, the gist of it is, try both. You don't necessarily have to have your shoulders fully open to have your pelvis overshot in your straddle. And therefore, you don't need to tap into your full shoulder flexion to have a straddle. Which allows me to make another comment for very flexible people. Very flexible people, you have both a curse and a blessing in that flexibility. And what I like to say to people who display great amount of flexibility in their hips and back and shoulders is that you're going to have so many more handstands at your disposal. And unfortunately, that also means that you have to navigate amongst many more options to find something that's viable in the first place. So your life is almost a bit harder at first, because when we're very stiff, we only have 2 avenues to pick. When we're very flexible, we have an array of things to choose and we're not sure which one to choose. So finding a viable shape in the first place when we're flexible is actually a harder work. But once we have found it, tweaking it into something a bit more like this or a bit more like that is much easier, because you can paint with many more colors. So I hope this makes sense. I definitely think, and we'll have a look, that if you lower your legs, you will take off. There's almost no way this will not happen. And remember that in your case, because you're flexible when it comes to the straddle, at the end of the day, we just need the pelvis. We don't need the pelvis as far out as possible. And sorry, this was my point. So the idea is coming back to my mind. Some people will have much more than open shoulders. Remember that the idea of close and open, although it sounds binary at first, and I need it to sound binary for most people who are getting introduced to that concept, this is a continuum. You can hold a handstand with your shoulders like that, upside down. You can hold a handstand with your shoulders like this, like that, like that, like that. Some people go further than this. Some people have, I'm not going to say hyperflexed, but very open shoulders. And if that's your case, you want to be mindful of that. You want to stop at 180 degrees. Because if you keep opening, you will go past what your body can control. That straddle will become tricky. That's what I'm trying to say. That straddle will become tricky if you're very flexible in your shoulders and you open without precisely starting to hold back. That is 0.5% of the audience here, but just a potential note for you. Okay, next questions. I may have to recharge. Thank you for the questions, by the way. I may have to recharge my water. See, I had whiskey last time, and I should have. It makes me, inspires me. I leave the wall by lowering the legs. If I don't lower my legs, I'm not sure how to leave the wall. Not sure if that's been covered as I keep lagging out, but I always, yeah, okay. So, give me just a second. Let's see. So that's back to the drill I was just mentioning, but I'm gonna answer it because I feel that sometimes it's hard to pick exactly the information you need out of an answer that covers what you need, but was not phrased and structured in such a way that it answers precisely what you need, if that makes sense. So what you need is exactly what I just said somewhere in my waffling just earlier, but you may not be able to, and that's not just new, it's just very hard to be able to be like, oh yeah, so this is me there, I think. When we kick up against the wall, if you're able to feel that at some point as you lower the legs and you keep your pelvis on the wall and you keep your shoulders where they're supposed to be, if you're able to feel that at some point your pelvis, poof, takes off the wall, you're doing something great. And you need to celebrate, pour yourself some champagne, and acknowledge that success. And I'm joking, but I'm not joking. Side note, you don't celebrate your successes, and I know that. Maybe. When you post them, you do. If you don't post them, do celebrate them. And to celebrate them, you need to recognize them. So track your progress, track what your body can do from 1 month to the other. Mastering a handstand is not just about kicking up into it and holding it 60 seconds. At first, it's kicking up into it and holding it 2 seconds. At first, it's kicking up against the wall, period. And the day you can do that, you celebrate. And then you can float with your fingers 2 seconds and you celebrate. And then 5 seconds and you celebrate. And then seconds and you celebrate. Because what we tend to do is to always have our eyes on the next goalpost. And so we're never happy for any kind of body practice, really, in my opinion, right? You get there and you're like, yeah, but that's what I hear every day, every week. They achieve something and I follow them for weeks, months, or sometimes years, right? The people who come to my in-person classes and online classes. And they can suddenly, the light bulb, we see the light bulb moment, and they come back down, they smile for 1 minute, for 1 second, and then they say, yeah, but that's not 20 seconds. And I'm like, 10 seconds were impossible last week and last year. And you can do this. Can you just not celebrate it? And it's important. It's not just about it being all positive, because I'm not all positive. It's about thinking of the long game that you are in. Otherwise, it keeps being frustrating. And that practice has to be rewarding somehow. It doesn't mean that you are complacent with your goals. It means that you are balanced in the way you approach your learning. You are able, especially when you train on your own. You see, when you train on your own, you're going to be harder on yourself than anybody else. So you have to be able to look at the data and be like, actually, I couldn't put my bum on the wall yesterday. I can now. Great. Well, back to your question, lowering the legs and taking off is not to be taken for granted. Now, what happens, I am going to assume, is that you are lowering them a bit too fast. So when you find that 1 second you're on the wall and the other you're off the wall, it usually means that the legs went down too fast, and before you even felt the takeoff, you are off the wall. And so what we really want to feel in that drill, which again is also important for any shape, is the precise moment at which our butt or our foot or our feet are getting lighter on the wall. Maybe I like to say it's just the fabric of your clothes in the butt to the wall position, for instance, that's resting on the wall, and half a quarter of an inch lower and we're off the wall. Well, that's the position that you want to find, and for you to be able to find it, so that you can stop in it and not be brought back down against your will to the floor, you have to perform that lowering motion very slowly. And by very slowly, I mean 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5. 5 seconds should give you the pace at which you will be able to feel that moment that preempts or precedes the actual takeoff. It never goes like that. If I lean against the wall, it's exactly that, right? If I lean against the wall, any kind of takeoff, so I'm heavy against the wall here, any kind of takeoff is going to feel like that. My body goes away from the wall, my shoulder is still on the wall. That's the analogy for your butt or your foot. And at some point, it's just the fabric, and just after that, you're off the wall. Well, there's a definite moment in which you are going to be light, and you need to be able to feel that. Now, the second part of your question is, if I don't lower my leg, I'm not sure how to leave the wall. You cannot leave the wall if you haven't lowered your legs. You cannot leave the wall if you don't have a functional shape. And a functional shape is, at least in my book, being defined as a shape that is light on the wall. And it's the same thing with any kind of shape, and that's super important to understand, right? I can look straight, good in a handstand against the wall, and yet be in something that is not functional. I can look terribly crooked upside down and be in something that absolutely exists without the wall. And it's all about finding lightness. And in the context of pie shapes, you are going to have to lower your legs just enough so that your fingers can finish the job. Your fingers eventually are the thing that keep you in balance, are the thing that make you take off the wall. And the common pitfall when we begin is to take off the wall at all costs and then expect the fingers to do their job. The job of the fingers starts much earlier. The fingers are supposed to help you take off the wall. And when you kick up against the wall a bit later down the journey, they're actually supposed to be engaged even before you reach the wall, for reasons we will not waffle about today. So keep this in mind. Your fingers can only do their job if your shape is somehow functional. And to be functional in the straddle, to functional being synonymous with light, your legs have to be somewhat low. Now, how low they have to be, back to what I was saying 50 minutes ago. I'm sorry, I thought it would be short, but it's never short. What was I saying? When we're practicing a straddle, how low they have to be, those legs, is individual specific. And the day you understand that, you will step away from following this advice and that advice, this tutorial and that tutorial, and you will develop a core, deep understanding of what handstands are, and you will be able to digest any future tutorial and advice much better, because you will filter it through what you feel instead of being chasing perceptions or sensations that you think you have to experience, or being chasing a shape that you think you have to be in. I hope this is clear. It sounds philosophical, but it's really about, maybe it doesn't really, because it's not, but it's really about me trying to make you understand that you have to develop your own compass, and that's what your handstand journey is about. Thank you. Great that this is helping. Unclear what the advantage of a kick up with one leg as opposed to jumping with both legs? This is great question. This is such a great question. I feel I'm gonna I'm gonna have to calm myself. Yeah, why do you even bother? Right? I'm not saying this to you, Ailsa. What you chase as a goal, I mean, you don't have to overthink it. Handstands are fun, period. Yeah, I like to go really into the trenches, but handstands are just meant to be fun, and people just show up sometimes once a week to have fun and not ask all those questions and have this kind of inquiry. I just want to blow some steam off upside down because I enjoy it. In which case we jump with both legs because it's fun. But any handstand goal is gonna involve months of work, and that's something we have to be aware of, because things don't come easily in handstands. And so then we have to maybe rewind a bit and ask ourselves, well, why do I want it? And because it's cool, to me, it's a perfect answer, right? But sometimes the answer is, well, because I want it in my practice. So I know many of you, as we say in Ireland, who have been working in this Straddle up, you also have a yoga background. Not everyone, right? But many. I mean, that's your case. Back to something a bit more basic. Having your hands already on the floor as you kick up may be something you want to practice. The question you ask could well be, what is the advantage between lunging into a kick up versus having your hands already on the floor? And my answer to this is, it depends on the context in which you plan on using handstands. If you just want to handstand for the sake of handstanding and being upside down, the way you go into it doesn't matter as much as finding the one that maximizes your chances at being there in the first place. So when we take just that example, having our hands already on the floor and then kicking up versus lunging into it and using the momentum of like a gymnastic kick up, those two kick ups have both pros and cons, which I won't get into today. But you can try them for yourself and really see quite quickly which one suits you better against the wall. How soft are you? How consistent are you? How do you feel? How stable do you feel? But if the person uses handstands within another movement practice, then it does make sense to go beyond the whole which one do I prefer and start asking which one do I need. And so for the flow work people, right? People who, Elsa Zeni. For the flow work people who are in the room, so people who have done flow work, there's quite a few of you, the teacher trainings we did together and whatnot. If you didn't know, I also teach contemporary dance or flow work, and I was asking them absolutely to not practice hands on the wall, because we very rarely find ourselves in those positions when we move across the floor. We usually very often are off the floor, hands off the floor, and we go into it. We go into that position, and our hands have to be able to kick up and embrace that momentum. If we only practice with our hands on the wall or on the mats, it won't quite carry over that well. For that matter, by the way, it's just an extreme example. This is the usual handstand hand placement, but in the context of flow work, we have much more chaos to deal with, and so I'm asking people to practice like that before, sometimes, or even with elbow spans, which is absolutely unthinkable for a very formal form of handstand teaching or learning, right? If you're a pure hand balancer. So it's all context dependent. And back to what is the advantage of kicking up with one leg versus jumping with both legs. So kicking up into a straddle versus straddling up. It depends if you can fathom in your movement practice a context in which this is desirable, then that's a good reason. If you like the looks of it, then that can also be a good reason. If you like a challenge, then that could be a good reason. I like it for my students because, given what we covered in the last tutorials, it forces people to really rely on shoulder flexion at the end of their kickoff. You cannot just simply push as hard as you can and hope to, here's the dog waking up. Is that the sign that we have to stop them? And hope that we will land on the ball. It forces us to actively think of our shoulders, which itself really promotes some higher degree of control in any kick up. So there are some mechanical value in learning this. But if that's the case, I would not necessarily favor the straddle up over the tuck up, over the frog up, over the elevator. And that drill we can do with the ball. There are different ways to approach the same if that's the end goal. I hope that makes sense. Cool. I'm gonna have a last look. Here you see, some of you are posting videos, but then not tagging, which is makes things hard. Question about I find this one quite interesting. Why? Somebody else asked that recently. Sorry, this is the end of the week. I'm getting. Is it okay to bend the elbows and extend them? Even more so when we perform those elevated on the block. You know the drill that we were doing with the hands on the block? Yes, it is. But shoulder bending and extending in the elbow usually helps us open the shoulders a bit better. This is a bit too much to go into quickly, but if you catch yourself when you try to balance off the wall or freestanding, doing this from time to time, it may well be that you subconsciously know how to recover from a handstand which is on its way down to the floor. And so those of you who know what the timber zone is, which is what we covered a few months ago, that's exactly what happens there. In the timber zone, your fingers are useless. You're going to have to do something to go back towards something that you can balance. Bending and extending the elbows is actually something that helps do that. It's not the only way. When we kick up with our hands already on a box, it's harder to muster the power and sort of flexion we need to get to the wall. So sometimes we may stop a bit short of where we should go, and we're gonna bend, extend the elbows to get another boost of momentum and actually land there. Same idea. It's like if you hadn't done that, probably you would have stopped in the timber zone. And if you don't know what a timber zone is, do rewind in your Facebook group and have a look at that. I think it was half decent, a tutorial. You get there, you bend, you extend, poof, and then that gives you the extra bit that you needed to go and reach the wall. Others will actually feel that in their own freestanding. When they lock the elbows, nothing happens, but when they allow this little flexion extension, it actually seems to maximize their success rate. For a change, usually advise against it because this is a lot. Sorry, when it comes to holding it, periods, not with the elevated surface, it's bound to happen. You may want to limit it, right? It's the same with the press. It's bound to happen at first. You're gonna work on limiting it. When it comes to people who cannot freestand yet, and if they find a better success rate by doing this every time they kick up, then yeah, absolutely. For most people, doing this sets them off balance. So I advise against it. But if you're one of those for whom this works, then do it. And then if it doesn't fit your context, then stop doing it. It's back to the same thing, right? All this to say, there is value though when you can already freestand, right? Which is where I'm getting this this question from. When you can already freestand, there is value in you not relying on it, so that it becomes a conscious choice, and that's maybe the thing I will wrap this Q&A with, if I don't have any more question. As the dog picks the bone and stop making noise in the background. The thing that you catch yourself perform that seem to be helpful to recover a handstand or lean against a handstand or lean against the wall or wherever you are at in that journey, they're neither right nor wrong, but they have to be conscious. So if you catch yourself bending and closing the shoulders or tweaking your pelvis to get there, or when you're about to lose it, well, there may be nothing wrong with that, but it has to be conscious so that it becomes maybe something that you only use when you need it and not something that you do by default. And that's something very common when you grow beyond the beginner level and you get to the improver and intermediate level, so you can freestand and you're working on freestanding better and better, longer and longer, and straighter and straighter. And in that process, at that stage of your journey, you will realize all the habits you have taken subconsciously to balance at all costs. Um, and of course, the habits we haven't examined early are harder to get rid of should we want to get rid of them. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to go back to what I was saying. At some point during this Q&A, your goal is to be able to hold your handstand as much as possible with your fingers and as less as possible with anything else. But there's a lot of other ways, other things we can do, fortunately, to hold the handstand. Closing and opening the shoulders, elevating and depressing the shoulders, bending and extending the elbows, flexing and extending the hips, yada, yada, yada. All that helps. But if every time you hold the handstand you have to do that, then you are forming a default pattern which may not suit what you want tomorrow. And so it's important to identify it early. And as I was saying, embrace it if it helps you. Why would you want to correct that right now? But tomorrow, if it doesn't fit what you want to do, so for instance, if you want to have a very clean press, you're going to have to work on your awareness of your elbows, because they can't bend in a clean press. If you just want to press, it can be okay. You may not need to work on that, because again, we're not talking about something that you're going to fix the day you notice it, which is another invitation for the beginners in the room to start filming yourself. Don't become obsessed with it. I know I refrain myself from filming myself quite a lot because I was like, who does that? And you look at me now with Instagram and all. But it helps you see things you're not even aware of. It helps you connect the dots between what you're doing, what you think you're doing, and what you're actually doing. And there will always be a gap between those two things. Okay. And Colette is saying, when kicking up, bending the elbows is often associated with the shoulders going forward. But I think that it's about bending and extending. So we're using this as a propeller. And when they extend, so when people extend, they also open. As if those two movements, they were, and as if it's the same for me, right? I'm somebody who, when I go into the timber zone, I bend and extend quite a lot here. This is my forte here. In the way I have deconstructed things when it comes to handstands, there's three main ways to save a handstand footing in timber zone. One is this. And you can be in the timber zone either because your kick up didn't bring you high enough initially, or because you got tired, you rebalanced poorly, and you went back down. And then you have maybe a shot at saving it. The thing is, it's not just that saves it. It's as you extend, we reopen the shoulders. As we bend, we close the shoulders. And maybe indeed, as we bend, we allow the shoulders to move forward. So it's not the flexion itself that allows us to do much. It's the fact that from a more flexed position, we can extend better, almost as if you were thinking of it as a jump, right? You are bending your legs to be able to propel yourself up, to jump higher, because you initially had your knees and hips flexed, so you had more range of motion to be able to spring off in the air. Right. I think this is it. Right, people? So I hope that was helpful. I know we started heavy, and I hope that didn't discourage some of you. Well done for your work. I will have I will have a look now, not tomorrow nor Monday, because I'm away, but I will have a look at some of your submissions. If you have any more questions after this video, do post them and I'll have a look at them as well. I hope you had fun with the drills. Of course, it doesn't come in 1 week. Yeah, you straddle up. I will finish with this because at the end of the day, this is what the week was about. And because this is, I know what the common pitfall I see all the time, and I was saying this in the first tutorial, right? The shape you hold, the way you go into it. Or in terms of priority, first, the shape you hold, and second, the way you go into it. We are usually obsessed with the eye-pleasing entries into handstands at the expense of where you want to be in the first place. And it's all about what we see in that third video, in that third tutorial, the refining your GPS coordinates. If you don't know where you're heading, you're taking your car and driving in the dark and hoping you will reach the desired straddle, but you don't know for sure how low your legs have to be, how tilted your pelvis has to be, how open your shoulders have to be. You're not setting yourself for success. You're not setting yourself for failure, but you certainly are not setting yourself up for success. So make things easy in your practice. Your handstand training sessions should not feel like you are doing the hardest things from A to Z. It should feel that you exactly know what you're doing and it feels easy-ish for 50 to 70% of the session. And then you start ramping things up. And I forgot if I was saying this in the tutorials, but I'm going to remind you of it right now. It's the same thing as going to the gym. It's the same thing as it's the same. I'm going to change the gym analogy in case you have never been there, because I keep using it and so I want to use something else. Imagine running and you're about to, a footballer, right? You must have watched a game before. They warm up before they go on the field, right? They do warm up. Of course, they run, they do their little kicks in the air, and then they go. I know that most of the thing that happened here, it's in a competition context, a bit different, but your warm up in your handstand session is not just that. It's also doing a regression of what you plan on working on. And that's important. If you're working on straddling up, if you're able to straddle up, if you're working on straddling up freestanding, but you don't have a 100% success rate, you need a few sets against the wall just to prepare yourself for the rest, and then you set, and then you grease the grooves that you need to grease, and then everything will come more easily to you. Okay? It doesn't have to take an hour. It doesn't have to, but it has to be smart this way. Okay? Have a good evening, a good weekend, have fun with the drills, and talk to you soon.